Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today we are going to kind of unpack a really, really significant turning point in the story of Jacob.
Yeah.
Um, and that's the events that are found in Genesis chapter 27, verse 41 through chapter 28, verse 22. Now, if you have a Bible, I encourage you to go ahead and open that up.
Yeah.
But if not, that's okay. We're going to be reading from it and kind of walking through it together. So
It's a pretty amazing passage.
it is. It's pretty dramatic, too. So to set the scene here, Jacob has he's pulled off a pretty elaborate scheme to get his father's blessing that was intended for his older brother Esau.
Yeah, he has. He's deceived his father, Isaac, and he has stolen the blessing, and that's the word that's used in the text. He stole it from his brother. And his brother's furious, as you can imagine. So now Jacob's on the run from his brother.
Yeah, he's a fugitive. He's had to flee his home. He's lost that sense of security. And I think, when we think about that, like, what would that have felt like? This guy who was anticipating, the privileges of this blessing. Now he's got this huge weight on his shoulders.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, but, it says he's out in the wilderness. And if you know anything about the ancient Near East, that wilderness was not a place you wanted to be. You were exposed to the elements. You're exposed to wild animals. There's no guarantee of food or water or safety.
No.
So he is in a very vulnerable place at this point.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I was thinking about this as I was reading it. We actually get this really poignant detail. It says that he stops for the night in this desolate place, and he uses a stone as a pillow. When you talk about stripped bare.
Yeah, it's a very vivid image of his kind of utter destitution at this point. He's lost everything. He's lost his family. He's lost his home.
He's alone.
He's alone, and all he has is a stone.
Yeah. And you really wonder what must have been going through his mind. He's out there in this vast emptiness.
Guilt. I would say guilt, regret, remorse,
Or nurse.
uncertainty.
What's next?
Yeah.
Exactly.
So this is where the story takes a really wild turn. In this moment of complete vulnerability, God shows up. He does.
And it's not in the way you'd expect.
Right.
You might think, okay, God's going to come down and rebuke Jacob for what he's done. But that's not at all what happens. Instead, it's this incredible display of grace.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, he sends a dream. And this is not just any ordinary dream.
Yeah.
This is a vision.
Tell us about it.
Well, in this vision, Jacob sees a ladder.
Oh, yeah. And this is not your stepladder you use to reach the top shelf. This is a ladder that stretches all the way from earth to heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And it's teeming with activity.
Yeah, angels are going up and down.
Ascending and descending.
Ascending and descending.
Yeah.
And at the very top is God himself. And that image of the ladder, I think it really captures this sense of connection.
Between heaven and earth.
Between heaven and earth.
Right.
Like a bridge. Even though Jacob feels totally isolated, he's actually not alone.
It's amazing, right? It's God's presence is still very much there, even in the midst of this wilderness.
Yeah.
And it's at this point that God speaks to Jacob. So what are some of the key things that God says in this dream?
Well, the first thing he does is he identifies himself. He says, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac.
Right. And I think that's so significant
because
it's immediately connecting Jacob back to this lineage.
To that covenant.
This bigger story that's been unfolding across generations. And then God goes on to make these really specific promises about the land itself.
Yes. He says, the land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring.
I mean, wow.
Talk about audacity, right? This guy's sleeping on the ground. He's a fugitive. And God's saying, this is going to be yours, this whole land. Not only that, but it's going to belong to your descendants.
It's a promise of an inheritance when he's basically lost everything.
Absolutely. And that promise, I think, it speaks to the fact that God's not done with Jacob yet. There's still a future for him.
And then the promises go even further, right? It's not just about the land.
Right. Right. God also promises Jacob his presence and protection. He says, behold, I am with you and I will keep you wherever you go. And again, I think this is just such a powerful reassurance for Jacob. He's going into the unknown. He doesn't know what's ahead. But God's saying, I'm going to be with you every step of the way.
Yeah. And that's not all.
No. He also promises to bring him back to this land.
So there's this promise of return. Like you said, it's not the end of his story. There's going to be a homecoming at some point.
And then lastly, and perhaps most importantly, God says, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you.
That's huge.
It is. It's this absolute guarantee that God's going to keep his word, that his commitment to Jacob is unconditional. It doesn't depend on Jacob's behavior or anything else.
So much to unpack here.
So much.
But I think one of the big things that jumps out at me is this concept of God's faithfulness.
Right.
We've talked about how Jacob has just done this, pretty terrible thing. He's deceived his father, he's alienated his brother, and yet God still shows up and reaffirms his promises.
Yeah. I mean, it would have been totally understandable if God had come down and said, Jacob, you really messed up this time. You're on your own.
Right. Like you reap what you sow. But that's not what happens.
Oh.
God's grace is bigger than Jacob's failures.
And I think that's such an important message for all of us.
Right.
Like, how often do we feel like our past mistakes or even our present struggles disqualify us from God's love or his blessings?
Totally. Like we've blown it, we're not worthy.
Right. But Jacob's story shows us that that's not how God operates. His faithfulness isn't dependent on our perfection. It's rooted in his character.
It's really freeing when you think about it like that.
It is.
And then, there's this other thing that stands out. Like the fact that God shows up in this really unexpected place. Jacob's not in a temple. He's not praying. He's sleeping on the ground in the wilderness.
It's not exactly a holy place, is it?
No, but it is a place of utter dependence. Like he has nowhere else to turn. And I think that's where God often meets us. Those moments when we're at our weakest, when we're most vulnerable.
Yeah. It kind of challenges our assumptions about how we're supposed to connect with God. Like we often think we have to have it all together or be doing all the right things. But Jacob's story reminds us that God shows up in the mess of our lives.
In the middle of our failures and our fears.
Exactly. It's like he's saying, I see you. I'm here.
Yeah. And you know what I love about this passage is that we actually see Jacob's response when he wakes up. He says, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it.
Such a powerful statement, like this dawning realization that God's presence was there all along.
Yeah. And I think, that's something that we can all relate to. Like, how often do we go through tough times and feel totally alone?
Yeah, like God's abandoned us.
Exactly. But then later we look back and we see how he was actually working behind the scenes the whole time.
It's like we're so focused on our problems that we miss the bigger picture.
And that bigger picture is that God is always with us. He's always guiding us.
Even when we don't feel it. Even when we can't see it.
So what would you say is like the big takeaway from all of this?
Well, I think it's that we can trust God's faithfulness. No matter what we've done, no matter what we're going through, he's not going to leave us.
And that his presence is a source of strength and comfort.
Right.
Especially in those really difficult times.
Right. And that even when we feel lost, he's still leading us.
So to wrap things up, if you're listening to this and you're feeling lost or alone, or maybe you're struggling with guilt from your past mistakes, just remember Jacob.
Remember how God met him in the wilderness? How he didn't condemn him, but instead gave him these incredible promises. Promises of land, presence, and a future.
Promises that were ultimately fulfilled.
Exactly. So if you're facing an uncertain future or you're struggling to see the way forward, just hold on to those promises. Trust in God's faithfulness. He's with you every step of the way.
Now, as we close, I want to leave you with something to think about. What are some times in your life when you might have missed God's presence? Times when you felt alone or abandoned, but looking back, you can see how he was at work.
Yeah. And how does recognizing those moments maybe change the way you see your current situation?
It's definitely something to ponder. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.